Hi there, audience. I didn't see you there. I guess we're talking about pivots today. My name is Jeff, and alongside my co-host, Abdo, we interview people who shape the future of health tech and healthcare, like our inimitable guest and pivot connoisseur today, Dr. Jehangir Appoo. Jehangir, how are you doing?
Well, thanks, Jeffrey.
There's so much to talk about when it comes to, I guess, what you've done, who you are, and what you will be doing in the future. But really, I think it all just boils back down to your childhood. So let's flash back to that. You spent your time in 7 different countries. Can you briefly recount that story to us and how that might have affected your journey to where you are today?
Yeah. So I was born in India. I lived in Iran for a little while, the UK, Dubai, Japan, back in India, and then I ended up going to high school, arriving in North America. I went to high school in Texas uh, before coming up to Canada, Rapp University. So that's kind of like my background of like moving around country to country, mostly so I'll do parents work. And, in terms of how it's affected me, I guess we're all affected by different upbringings. There's pros and cons. Getting to see different cultures, appreciate how different people do things. Being an immigrant at different places everywhere I went, it was like new. So that you build some skills of resilience probably around that. And yeah, so I think for me, it was, and, I have friends from these different countries. It's also a different perspective on how the world might work.
I've also done a bit of traveling, just because of my parents' work and all. Where do you think home is for you then?
Yeah, I've been in Canada for a long time. And, I think I have, definitely home is Canada. And there's this concept that, people appreciate what they don't have, right? So people who haven't traveled look forward to traveling. Growing up in so many different places, I always kind of like wanted to have a sense of belonging to a place. So that's kind of important to me. And I definitely feel I've grounded here.
Hmm, I like that. So then tell us a bit about your parents. What was it like growing up traveling all over the world? That sounds very cool.
For them or for me.
I mean, both. Why not?
So sure. So my parents were from India, both of them. And I think, they had an opportunity, my dad had an opportunity to work with a foreign company and have a chance to get outside of India and uh, hopefully give his kids a chance for an education, an opportunity elsewhere. So I think that's what they were really focused on. Uh, and so they went through a lot for that. Uh, I think they enjoy, traveling. They hadn't come from means or families who traveled a lot. So I think it was engaging for them to sort of explore the world, and then a real focus on sort of, the children's education, study abroad. In India, things are competitive, and if you don't have a lot of means, it's a bit tough. Uh, yeah, I think from my point of view, it was, exciting to go to different places, but also a challenge. It was also a time where the parents didn't really ask us if we wanted to move schools and things like that. As sometimes we do today. It's like, if they move from this part of town to that part, it was just like we're leaving. And you go to a different place and different culture and different language and sort of have to adjust.
So I listened and read the transcript of a previous podcast that you had done. And in there, it was mentioned that one of your initial steps towards medicine was a fascination with genetics and the role that genetic therapies could play a role in defeating cancer, because it affects so many different people. Was any of that guided by what your parents said, or was that something, a passion that you discovered on your own?
Yeah. So So much of life is like we are who we are because we're shaped by our experiences along the journey, right? Like people say, if I knew this 20 years ago, I would have done something differently or done it in a different fashion. But we only know what we know now because of the steps we've taken. Right. So my dad was had a background in engineering, my mom in teaching, so we didn't have any medical background in the family. And my parents were very supportive of me studying anything I wanted to study as long as I studied. And, they would make sure that I would have the opportunity to do that. And so I started off in chemistry at university. And after first year, I switched to biochemistry. And it was really during that journey, like while being in biochemistry, to course on inborn errors of metabolism, another one on oncogenes. And that's how I got exposed to like cool stuff that was, I was exposed continuously during my undergrad to cool stuff going on in science, but stuff that really resonated with me.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that took you into med school, but I read that you had a fear of blood. How did you find that out? And then I guess, how did that affect your journey toward cardiothoracic surgery? Because correct me if I'm wrong, there's a bit of blood during surgery.
Yeah, lots of fun. Yeah. So, okay, that's interesting. The
I caught you off guard.
yeah, well, these are kind of interesting stories. So, like, again, probably sort of evolution. So, and just being young. So yeah, when I was growing up, I didn't like the sight of blood, even on TV or watching like war movies or horrific accident scenes, things like that. I was quite like, I would say, queasy from pulling up. Uh, and so actually, when I told my parents that I was thinking about applying for medical school, uh, they just kind of laughed at me because like, they knew that I couldn't stand the sight of blood and I couldn't tolerate having an injection. And we used to travel a lot. We used to have lots of vaccinations and different things. We moved to different countries and it was always like I would try and run away from the needle and all this kind of stuff. So as a kid, so when I told my parents that I was, applying to med school, they kind of thought it was funny. And then, what happened in that evolution is that I think in medical school, also a step before that is like, why did I decide to go into med school knowing that I was scared of blood? Uh, I think partly just, maybe the bravado of the young and feeling you could just do things that I kind of wanted to do oncology and hematology and not surgery. So I didn't really think too much about blood. I was thinking more about genetics. So I went in, but then what happened, I think, in medical school is that one starts learning about structures and how they work and their relationships to other things. So when you see things at surgery, it's no longer gory details. You're seeing this, you're seeing the superior vena cava and you're seeing the right ventricle and the left ventricle, and you're looking at the pulmonary artery and you sort of know the structure, the purpose. So it becomes more meaningful, I think, when maybe you're just sort of staring at a mess of things. It's a little overwhelming. So I guess knowledge helps, with that pathway.
Maybe you mentioned it, but I didn't catch it. So why did you decide to switch to surgery? Because that's a big jump.
Sure, life story. Yeah. So okay. So since you're asking if we have time, hope we don't run out of time. So how did I switch to surgery? Well, I was initially interested in hematology and oncology, and I did have my first elective in that. But I felt like I kind of experienced all the side effects of chemotherapy when I was on that rotation. And like, I felt like nauseous and tired and malaise and like, it wasn't really what I thought it would be. So I didn't really enjoy that. And then the second thing I tried was ER, because at that time there was that TV show ER. It had just come out. Everybody was watching it. Every med student was watching it. Every person in my class did an elective in MERD. And so I did elective in MERD, and it was good, but I didn't like the fact that my work was never finished. Like I was working really hard. I was working as fast as possible, but the waiting room was always full. And at the end of my shift, like it was still full. I just did all this stuff, but I could never sort of get sort of closure or completion. And for my personal aesthetic, I guess that didn't resonate. And then surgery, I did have an interest in surgery, but I thought I did an elective in it for a good reason in that, I'd done some internal medicine electives, I'd done some ER, and I did an elective in surgery because I thought if I go into surgery, I'd go into general surgery. And cardiac surgery seemed a little bit repetitive to me at that time. But I thought doing an elective in cardiac surgery for two reasons. One was that you get more exposure for technique because the incision is bigger. So as a student, you get to do a little bit more hands-on rather than working for a small incision. So I thought that'd be a good idea. And the second thing was that I thought I'd learned some cardiology, and I felt my cardiology as a medical student was weaker than studying my neurology or other things in internal medicine. So that's the reason I did that rotation. But then during that time, I just had a great time on that cardiac surgery rotation. And so after that, I decided I was still looking at different things, and I had a chance at counter, and then I decided to pursue cardiac surgery.
I
So
love
I
that
think a
story.
lot of things, Abdul, like, we don't know how things are going to turn out. We just have our rationales for doing things, and then just leads to new insights. So as long as you do things, I think what you think are the right reasons and they're wholesome, we keep learning along the way, and we make our decisions based on our experiences. So I think that's what we've been talking about here for the last 15 minutes is really like how, whatever we do is based on our experiences. So the learning point, I think, like when I speak to my kids or others around just committing to something, right? And then doing it well, and then that road opens up for you. There's things that one can't imagine one would end up doing. But just by committing to something, doing it well, focusing on it, avenues open up.
That's a very wise insight. Sounds like something my dad would say, if I'm being honest with you. From where you are, though, looking back, how do you feel about your decision now?
Decision to go to medical school, you mean?
Surgery, cardiothoracic surgery.
Yeah. For me, it was a really rewarding career. I really got a lot out of it. It's technically challenging. When it comes to surgery, it's actually a very clean type of surgery. It's extremely what I liked about cardiac surgery was, going into it, it's extremely intense. It's not superficial stuff. It's a huge difference in people's lives. It also has like a lot of interesting physiology that the heart has a lot of relationships to what's going on with the brain and the lungs and the gut and the kidneys. So even though people sometimes think heart surgery is just one or two operations, there's actually lots of interactions with the other organ systems. So I found it was rewarding personally, professionally. I think at the end of the day, it really resonated with my personality of the way I like to do things. Allows a lot of creativity.
I mean, you were a veritable titan in the field. You established an artificial heart program. You performed Southern Alberta's first artificial heart device implant. Then you founded and directed the internationally renowned Calgary Thoracic Aortic Program until 2019. I know the story or the reason why you left, but I want to give you the chance to talk about why you left and how you felt about it in the immediate instant. It mustn't have been easy.
Yes. So cardiac surgery, like we talked about, is rewarding. And for me, it was also like the clinical and the academic interaction and growing the field, contributing to the future. I stopped operating in 2019 because I had an injury to my neck. And it became clear that the operating posture itself was contributing. And it involves a fair bit of flexion and extension when you're in surgery. And I needed to keep my, what we call is the cervical spine aligned with my thoracic spine. So keeping my neck aligned with the rest of my body and not stenting and flexing it so much. So, I felt like it was kind of the same conversation that I've had with many patients, which is like things have happened in the past. We can't change that, but we have to make some modifications going forward. So for me, it became clear that I couldn't continue operating. I have to do something different. I was requiring too many medications on a daily basis just to be able to operate. And so, I think it's fortunate in some ways that we've been working through this for a few years, trying a bunch of different therapies, trying different drugs, etc. So I had a little bit of time. And it became clear that all these different maneuvers we're trying weren't making headway. So as I had to stop operating, I guess then the question became like, I'm still young, what do I do next? I'm kind of, used to sort of doing cool things and having impact. Like if I'm not like holding someone's heart in my hand every day, how do I like continue to have impact with it?
It's kind of cool.
So, yeah. So that was like, so a decision making algorithm there.
Yeah. I mean, I can hear some of the thoughts that you went through, and I guess the heaviness of that decision. And I guess the work that you had to do in order to make, flashback to the introduction, a pivot to where you are now. And that's what I want to talk about now, or give you some space to talk about. You mentioned wanting to do something of impact that at least rival to some extent the impact of holding someone's heart in your hand and, helping them live a better life after. Why did you make the pivot that you made? What did you make it to? And how did you make it? I'll give you some time to really summarize that.
The why would be around the fact that I knew I couldn't operate, so I had to do something different. And so that was clearly the why, because cardiac surgery was rewarding for me.
Yeah.
The how is, I think probably I use the same tools that I do for everything else, which is I just have an analytic type of mindset where I sort of come up with a long list of possibilities and go through the pros and cons of everything. And a little bit of what we were talking about earlier is just like start doing things, and then the roads, become open up. I looked at things like at clinics or do things outside of cardiac surgery. If I were to be trained to do ICU or maybe palliative care, I enjoyed those type of things. I also thought about like what my personal goals in life were. I have this idea, like I like this concept of compounding, or just like a snowball analogy of just getting bigger and bigger. So, I wanted to compound knowledge, to take what I learned, it's planet, 25 years of medicine, apply that knowledge and learn more. I want to compound meaningful relationships. So deepen relationships with good people that I know and meet other good people through them. And the third was to compound dollars while doing those first two. So those are kind of like the goals I had, is to sort of like, I don't want to set up another career if I can't operate. And when I looked at 70 different things and along the way, and I sort of thought about where my strengths were, where my interests were. And also part of it is like where you're at with life. I felt like I'd accomplished a lot clinically. So it allowed me to then do something else. It's where I landed is kind of what I call is the intersection of medicine, finance, and impact, where I run a venture capital fund that is investing in digital technology, machine learning, as a way to make a meaningful impact in healthcare. I'll maybe finish that off by saying that like one of the things that I was interested in early on was epidemiology and doing things on a large scale. And cardiac surgery is very much a one-on-one type of work, really hard, affect one patient. Fact, it's impressive. But I felt like doing things on a larger level, you could have a different type of impact. And as I reflected back on my life, like I felt fortunate to sort of see two exponential technologies at one lifetime. When I started university, there was this thing called www. And nobody knew how it would play out. 30 years later, it was just another thing out there. And so when I look at machine learning today, my assumption is that this is something that's going to affect all of us. We don't understand quite how we're going to use it 30 years from now. And what I'm interested in is how do we, how's machine learning going to be used in healthcare, and how can we, help shape that path? Like I wasn't bright enough to understand how the internet was going to apply to all of us and be involved with the birth of the internet. But here was another opportunity. And really I was going to focus still on my areas. It was my expertise, my strength was in understanding medicine. So I was, my focus is really how do we help shape the path going forward? And by having a fund, what we do is we talk to great founders from all over the world, young people who want to change the world for better. We work with these people, we learn from them. And with each company we work with, we learn more. They can apply that to other companies in the portfolio and the next company we see. And that way we can help shape the path, even though I'm not going to sit here and say, like, I know how it's going to play out 30 years from now, but based on learnings from one experience and a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth experience, all concentrated in this space, we continue to learn and apply. Yeah. So I think it's always remains about learning and then applying that lot of knowledge to learn more. I don't think we learn so much if we don't apply.
It's an interesting take. From what you've talked about, it sounds like you're driven by this idea of excellence somehow. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think it annoys some people sometimes. But yeah, I think I'm driven by it, but also like personally, it's just what I choose to get involved in. Right? Like if I'm going to spend my cycles, my time, effort, etc., I like it to be at a high quality. And I'm okay with other people who want to do whatever they want to do. I just don't need to necessarily be involved in superficial level type of things. And so I think we sort of got back on this theme a few times in this conversation. Is like what resonates with your own aesthetic, right? So I prefer diving deep, and I'm not really good at gossip and sort of talking about the weather. I don't know why people talk about the weather when they're not going to do anything about it and it's not going to change their day. And it's not like, they're planning on playing beach volleyball today, but they're talking about the weather. So I just don't waste any cycles talking about it. But anyway, that's just me.
I feel you.
This is a round table of the same kind of person. Okay. Might be a bit personal then, but what makes you the right person for what you're doing in the VC space? Why you?
Yeah. So why me? Well, I have a background in medicine. I have a couple decades of experience in investing and thinking about financial markets and partnering with hedge funds, etc. And I think that's a fair question. And we sort of thought about this in last year or so. And I think, so the fund I run is called AIoT Health. So artificial intelligence that thinks healthcare. And why us? Why me? it's because I think our competitive advantage, our secret sauce, our value proposition is this ability to be fluent in different languages. So ability to speak the language of medicine and understand it, ability to speak the language of business and of finance. So it's that combination that I've learned has been actually quite rare when it comes to investing in medical technologies. Being able to truly understand what the impact is of an intervention in healthcare and being able to speak with physicians in different subspecialties and be able to speak that language. So I didn't even know that we spoke a different language until I stopped operating. It's just part of our culture. No, it's just sort of normal talk. But, looking at it from the outside, I see like this ability to read between the lines.
What about engineering? Is finance, medicine? Where's engineering?
Abdo was about to blow a gasket asking the
What's
question.
happening? What's happening?
Yeah, so I think there's room for everything, right? It's just we have to figure out what our own strengths are. I do think that, well, it's not what I think. I've read this since I think it's been shown, is that innovation occurs when you can take expertise in different systems and merge them. So it doesn't matter what the systems are. Like I'm doing medicine and finance, but it could be engineering and law, right? It could be engineering and the humanities, or it could be engineering and finance. There's like so many different things that one could do, but it's like taking principles from one area and applying them in a different area. I don't think that one can have everything, right? But so you focus on what your strengths are as a person. And I think that's kind of, one of the nice things of like having spent a few cycles on this planet is like we've developed expertise in certain things, right? And so now you look at applying those expertise in different fields. So if your expertise is in engineering, then that's awesome. And you look where you can apply that.
I want to take it back to something that you said before. You had said that you had some expertise in the financial arena with working with hedge funds and looking at the markets. How long before your pivot and founding and starting of AIoT were you involved in those sectors? Because it takes a certain degree of experience to be comfortable working with that language.
Yeah, so probably a couple decades. So as a young man, I sort of learned how to figure out the stock market, and one thing led to another, but nothing happens overnight.
Yeah. And was that a particular interest or event that drove that personal learning? Because again, your main career was in cardiothoracic surgery, and that and the financial markets don't seem to be explicitly
it's
tied in
interesting.
any way.
Yeah, I mean, I was always interested in science and, not at an early stage in business. And I was interested in like how money works, speed of money, but kind of was interested in sort of like almost like the science of money and like what does the market do? Why does it fluctuate? And those type of things. So I started reading about it and getting involved. And we talked earlier about like learning and applying. So, and then by getting involved, I learned more, then applied more, etc. So one of my learnings along the way, like being in medicine, is that generally as clinicians, we don't really use a lot of business principles. And what I learned is that, at least in Canada, and that business actually has a lot of like things that are actually scientific principles of like how to do things, how to assess, we don't really talk about ROI in medicine. Like if you do cardiac surgery, we don't talk about, we're not measuring necessarily quality of life in 1 year for all our patients or 5 years and things like that. We have short-term ROIs, patient experience, this, that, the other. We don't look at those things. So business has a lot of principles of like how things are done that are actually, I was surprised to learn that it's actually a science. And so, that sort of was a learning that happened later on in life as I got exposed to a few things.
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot more of that conversation to be had if we dove down that hole. But I do want to center the conversation more on your fascinating work with AIoT. For those in our audience who aren't necessarily familiar with how a venture capital or VC firm works, can you break it down for me like I'm five? How are the partners in AIoT or venture capital firms structured, and how do they work together?
I like that they're explaining it to a 5-year-old. So I would say that it's so with venture capital, we're investing in early stage companies. So people who have an idea about changing the world for better. That's kind of what we're looking for. And what happens is in order to take things from an idea to actually make it happen and improve the world, you need capital behind you. You need some funding. So what a venture capital fund does is it provides early stage companies with access to capital so that they can grow and do good work. And the key for a venture capital fund is trying to identify which companies might be successful versus those that aren't going to be successful. I think different venture capital funds have different ways of doing things, and there's a lot of ways of winning and being successful. For us, it gets back to like being able to speak that language of medicine and understanding the impact. So what we try to do is understand the impact of a technology and the impact on human life. And that starts us getting interested. So if we get that, then we go through like multiple other layers of like, is this the right team? Do they have the right business model? Do they have pricing strategy? Do they have the right people around them? Do they have the right intellectual property protection, legal, etc.? And then at the end of the day, if our partners make a lot of money, it's only because that inflow in was impact, which means that a lot of people have been positively affected. So it's kind of a win-win model, right? Like, so because our intake is based on impact, if our partners make a ton of money, it's because that technology has had so much impact on people. And our impact is in healthcare.
So that if you can simplify it even a layer lower, what are your success metrics here?
Yeah, so that's something that we're continue to work with. Like, how do we measure impact, right? We measure like number of people affected, how were they affected, what were their options otherwise without this technology. So I think, assessing impact is a challenge, and with ESG, there's lots of different things. So we're always thinking about how we assess impact. With a venture capital fund, generally your success metrics are your returns, right? To invest X amount of dollars, how much do you get back at the end of the day? And again, I think, for us, like I looked at all these different ways of assessing impact. And I think like the thing I landed on was like, we're only investing in technologies because we think they have an impact on human life. So if our partners make a ton of money on it, it's because that technology has affected so many human lives.
To stay on topic with VCs, then, in some circles, VCs have a bad reputation. Why do you think that is?
What do you want to sort of give me some indication what
I
you're thinking
suppose
about?
it's more, do you think the money gets in the way of impact at times?
Sure. So it all depends on what the driver is. I feel like in any industry, there's always people who do better than others. There's always people who have different alignment of interests. I don't think medicine is very different either. And there's different quality of people. So I think in the venture capital world, that you've got great people doing amazing stuff, and you've got other people who might not be. And, I'm not here to judge who's doing what. Like, I think at the end of the day, it's like, why does somebody want to partner with somebody else, right? Like, if you were to look at partnering with a VC, it's about like what aligns with you. What are they doing? If they're telling you what they're doing, why does that align with you? Right. And if it aligns with you, their message fits with yours, then, hopefully that's a positive journey. But if it's not a positive journey, at least you guys have the same thought process going in. And that's why you chose that.
Talking about partners and bringing it back to the whole simplification theme, some terms that people might hear when they're starting to explore the language of venture capital is a general partner versus a limited partner. Can you explain the two concepts and how they relate, especially in your context?
Yeah, so sure. These are some of the details. The general partners, the person or people who are running the fund, who are making the decisions of who to invest in, and they're also responsible for bringing in capital to invest, right? So the limited partners are the people who contribute capital, who are relying on the general partners to invest that capital or traditional VC model. There's different models within the venture capital space, but the idea being that it's a partnership where somebody is scouting and working full time to identify opportunities, and then someone else is investing in that. The general partners also invest their own money. I do believe in sort of doing things, going back, you asked earlier about excellence. Like, I just believe in doing things well. So like doing things off the side of the desk is not really that attractive, right? So to me, so I believe that it makes a big difference if somebody's working full time on something.
And that's what makes having a general partner attractive. It's someone who's working full time to rein in capital to figure out how to expertly and appropriately, dole out capital to the best investments, as well as to leverage relationships to figure out which decisions are best. But as a segue into relationships, AIoT has grown quite a bit in the past year. And in a recent newsletter to your limited partners, you highlighted relationships and communication as a core underpinning the speed, translatability, and traction that your portfolio companies have had in the past little while. So can you tell us a story or two that exemplifies the critical role that relationships, either between the LPs or GPs or between yourself and others outside of your organization, that exemplify the role that, that can you tell us stories that highlight the roles that those relationships play in your company's successes is, I guess, the summary of it all.
Yeah. So interesting question. Good question. So different things, probably gets back to like this thing that I always talk around, like alignment with incentives. So first of all, one of the things that venture capital, we talked earlier, is that it's investing in private companies as opposed to public companies. So I'm investing in Apple and IBM and things like that. So in the public markets, things are fully disclosed. Everyone has access to all the stocks that are listed to the TSX or S&P. But so one thing in the venture capital is that it's about access to information, right? So it's all about relationships that allow you to have access to information and to deals. So venture capital is about being able to see something that someone else hasn't had the chance to see yet. So that's one relationship that's important. The, and that I think it has to get down to like win-win models. or relationships between our founders and us. If we can help them, they are in turn teaching us about things that they're doing. They have other good people that they know that they introduce us to. Um, and then also, like, if we think about like what we're doing in healthcare, like as a cardiac surgeon, I know a lot about cardiovascular physiology, et cetera, a lot of the problems. And I can speak the language of medicine, but it's quite different when there's, say, a company that's doing something in the neurology space, and the ability to speak to one of our partners who's perhaps a neurologist or a neurointerventionalist and ask them about their pain points when they see a patient with this disorder. Is this a big deal or not? And what are they thinking about? Right? Is like those kind of relationships. So with our fund, we have about 60% of our limited partners are physicians. They represent 12 to 15 different subspecialties in medicine, from anesthesia to psychiatry to surgery. So that's also a very valuable relationship that we have, where they're clearly interested in new technology that's coming down the line with their field, investors, and partners. So often, I think when physicians get asked a question, it's the wrong questions, and that they have a lack of alignment of interest. Like you'll see a company come and say, like, the cardiac surgeon's, is this a good valve? Do you like this valve? Yes, I like the valve. Would you use the valve? Yes, I'd use the valve. And but they haven't asked me if I would pay extra for this valve, if I'm going to actually go fight with the, powers that be to replace the valve we have and get this other valve. How much extra would I pay for this valve? What would be the benefit to the patient? I mean, I like it. Yes, it's nice, but like, how much of a difference is it going to make to my patients? Right. That's not what they've asked. So then go back into the report saying 95% of heart surgeons say they would use this valve. You're just asking the wrong questions. Yes. It's like, yeah.
Sorry, I was a bit caught off guard with that story. What do you think is the right question to be asking them? Something that's not
So
so leading.
So the question, it's like, I think when we ask questions, we have to understand what's in it for the other person, right? Like if you're asking a friend and they want to help you, that makes sense. You're asking someone who's part of your company and you think you're growing your business. So we're a group of doctors working together. We're thinking about, how we run a more efficient business, et cetera, how we tackle some of our problems. Like everyone is aligned as to what, the problem you're trying to solve. So it's about trying to figure out, being open, having disclosure, trying to say, this is what we're trying to learn. This is why. Would you be willing to help? How can we get you engaged? Would you like to try this? Would it be interesting to try this? Like different people. So when it gets to like physicians and technology, physicians are willing to work with companies for a variety of different reasons. But if the company doesn't understand what those reasons are, then it's unlikely that they're going to get a good answer, right? If you just go to a KOL, and it's a key KOLs, a key opinion leaders, you ask a generic question, you're going to get a generic answer. I think this is an issue for a lot of technology companies working with clinicians, is trying to understand, why a clinician might want to work with a company. I can go through some of those reasons if you want me to.
Please do. That was going to be my next question.
Yeah. So that's often around like, so what clinicians are busy, but then technology companies have a cool widget they discovered that can improve healthcare, but then they need it to be tested and tried out in a formal setting. That's great for the company. What's in it for the clinician? So sometimes clinicians want like consultancy fees. Sometimes they would like to be the chief medical officer of a company and get like equity ownership. Often, physicians don't want a financial reimbursement. They want the ability to be able to publish in high impact journals without a conflict of interest. So they don't want the dollar, but they want to do impactful research that's in their area of interest, right? Other times, physicians could, we all, as physicians, we all have different roles within our divisions, right? Some people in charge of education, some people in charge of basic science research, clinical research, quality improvement. So, that somebody may be in charge of technology, and the chief may want that clinician to work with different technology companies, because when we work with technology, you get, it interests the residents and fellows, and you get a higher quality trainee. So it may be that that person is in, that's their job, to work with 10 different technology companies. And so they'll be interested in working with you for that reason. Or it could be a clinician could be at a non-academic site, especially in the States, and when they might be want to work with technology companies, because when they use technology, it gets in the press. When it gets in the press, patients get referred to them or come to them. So that might be their incentive. Or a clinician might be based on a research track, and a new clinician generally has, 3 to 5 years to get a CIHR or NIH type of grant that sets up their career. And they have to get that in the first few years. And in order to get a large grant of several millions of dollars, you might need pilot data. So if they partner with a technology company that's working in their space, it allows them to get some early data, and then allows them to then use that data to apply for their grant and set up their career. So if you don't understand why a clinician may want to work with you, it's unlikely that it will be a very productive relationship in the short term, and likely it won't be sustainable in the long term. So this is this concept of like aligning incentives.
You literally took the next question from my list of questions.
You keep doing
It was
that.
gonna
I don't like
be stop being in our brains. I just wanted to ask you, like, what is, in your opinion, the best way to align incentives? Is it to be straightforward, in your opinion, and to assess and have a direct conversation about what the counterparty wants? Or is it just more investigative work, asking around, building connections overall?
Yeah, I think in terms of alignment of incentives, what I've learned is so often there are things that parties are thinking about, but we don't want to discuss. And it's under the table, as opposed to openly talking about it, right? Like what's in it for the company, what's in it for the clinician, uh, you know, what is the, what is a clinician interested in? Maybe they're interested in, like, they give a lot of talks, uh, across the world on a particular topic, and they like to have slides and talk about the newest technologies in this area as the area is evolving, and that's why they want to be interested, right? Uh, but I think generally there's a misalignment of interests happen because of the unset. So if we can identify, and often like unset is often around money in many different aspects of life. So if we can actually just openly say, hey, I'm asking you this question because it's helpful for me to know, and, just, I want to ask you this, right? Uh, People get suspicious about the reasons otherwise if it's not discussed. So I kind of favor disclosure, Jeffrey, and talking about things openly at a time.
That makes sense. And just for one last question, in your newsletter, you use a really great metaphor: only swing when you see a fastball in the middle of the strike zone. So what's the vision going forward for AIoT Health, and is patience the strategy strategy driven primarily by the increasing cost of capital, or is it a principle that you've always held dear?
Yeah, so we want to sort of make asymmetrical bets, right? Where things are lined up that makes sense to us. Uh, s- there's another model in venture capital which is making a lot of bets, and that one of them will pay off in a big way. We're more around impact and trying to go deeper into things. So we want to be patient, and we want to, when you get the right founder, that we happy backing and partnering with long term, get the right idea, the right business model, and that everything sort of fits in nicely to deliver impact, that's when it should take the bat off our shoulders. So yeah, we're willing to be patient.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can find out more about AIoT Health at aiothealth.ca. Is that correct?
Yep.
And you can find out more about How It's Med at howidsmed.com. Till next time.